They thought she was just another black woman trespassing in a place she didn't belong. They didn't know she was the FBI director's wife and that the man they had just humiliated was about to bring hell down on them. It started in the marble lobby of the Hoover Building, where the polished floors reflected the sharp shoes of men who believed they owned the air they breathed. Julia Monroe had walked in with a confident stride, her crimson dress swaying like a flag of defiance. She'd come to surprise her husband for lunch, something they rarely managed with his impossible schedule. But that day, the surprise was on her. The first security guard spotted her before she even reached the metal detectors. His eyes narrowed not in suspicion, but in judgment. His partner, a taller man with a square jaw, moved in like a predator circling prey. They didn't ask for her name. They didn't ask for ID. Instead, they demanded, "Ma'am, you can't be here. Who let you in?" Julia's smile faltered, but her voice was steady. "I'm here to see my husband, Director Monroe." The words didn't have the effect she expected. Instead of relaxing, their posture stiffened. One guard smirked. "Right. And I'm the president. Come with us." She tried to explain, but they grabbed her wrists not violently, but with the casual entitlement of men who believed they were untouchable. In seconds, she was being escorted through a side corridor, her heels clicking against the tile, her dignity stripped with each step. By the time Marcus Monroe, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, heard the news, Julia was already in a holding room in the basement. The call came from an assistant who sounded terrified. "Sir, I think you need to come downstairs. There's been a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding was a polite word. What Marcus found when he entered that room was not a misunderstanding, was a crime. Julia sat in a metal chair, hands still cuffed, eyes blazing with humiliation and rage. Two white security officers stood by the wall, their arms crossed like bouncers outside a nightclub. Marcus's gaze swept over the scene, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Remove those cuffs," he said, voice calm but heavy with authority. The taller guard hesitated. "Sir, we were just following." "Remove them," Marcus repeated. This time, it wasn't a request. The clink of the handcuffs unlocking was followed by a silence so sharp it felt like glass. Julia rubbed her wrists but didn't look away from the men who had put her there. Marcus turned to them, and in that moment, every cell in his body burned with controlled fury. "Do you have any idea who this woman is?" he asked. The shorter guard swallowed. We didn't know, sir." "That's right," Marcus said. "You didn't know? And that's the problem. You saw her skin before you saw her humanity. You saw her race before you saw her rights. And you made your decision." Neither man spoke. The air was thick, the fluorescent lights buzzing like distant wasps. Marcus straightened, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had prosecuted terrorists, hunted serial killers, and dismantled organized crime syndicates, but who had never been this personally enraged. "You work in the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country. You have been entrusted with the authority to protect this building, this nation, and its people. And you abused it not because of a credible threat, but because you looked at a black woman in a place you didn't think she belonged and decided she was a problem." He stepped closer, his eyes locked on theirs. "You're done here. Effective immediately." The words landed like hammer strikes. The guards shifted, their confidence crumbling. "Sir." "No appeals," Marcus cut in. "You'll be escorted out. Your clearances are revoked. And I'll be personally reviewing every arrest, every stop, every report you've filed. If I find even one more incident like this, God help you." Julia stood, placing a hand lightly on her husband's arm. Her touch was both a grounding force and a silent acknowledgement. She knew the fight wasn't over. This was bigger than her, bigger than them. They walked out of the holding room together, the corridor suddenly feeling narrower, the walls pressing in. But Marcus wasn't done. Not by a long shot. By the end of the day, a memo bearing his signature went out to every department, every division, every agent in the Bureau. It was blunt, uncompromising, and impossible to misinterpret. Racial bias has no place in law enforcement. Not here. Not anywhere. If you wear this badge, you will uphold the rights and dignity of every citizen without exception. Failure will result in immediate termination. The fallout was immediate. Some applauded. Others whispered in dark corners. The security union was already preparing a statement, framing the incident as a regrettable but understandable security precaution. But Marcus didn't care about their spin. He cared about the truth, and the truth was, his wife had been treated like a suspect in the very building where justice was supposed to live. That night, at home, Julia sat on the couch, a glass of red wine in hand. Marcus joined her, loosening his tie, his face softer now but still shadowed with the day's events. "Do you think it'll change anything?" she asked quietly. Marcus took a long breath. "Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But every time someone in this building hesitates before acting on prejudice, every time they remember what happened here, we'll be one step closer." Julia studied him for a moment, then smiled, not the bright, effortless smile she wore in the morning, but a quieter one, forged in resilience. "Then I guess today was worth it." They sat together in silence, the city lights flickering through the window like distant stars. Outside, the world kept turning, full of people who would never know what had happened in that basement room. But inside their home, a battle had been fought and won. At least for now. The next morning, Marcus woke to the sound of his phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. Julia was still asleep beside him, her hand curled under her cheek, the faint glow of early sunlight cutting through the blinds. He wanted to let it ring. He wanted to pretend, for just a few more minutes, that they were an ordinary couple waking up to an ordinary day. But they weren't. He reached for the phone, glanced at the caller ID, and felt his chest tighten. It was the Deputy Attorney General. "Marcus." The voice on the other end began without preamble. "We've got a problem." "Which one?" Marcus asked, swinging his legs out of bed. "The press got hold of the memo." Marcus closed his eyes. He'd expected it would leak, things like this always did. "Which outlet?" "The Post." "And Fox." Of course. Two opposite ends of the media spectrum, which meant the story would be twisted in two entirely different ways before the day was out. The Post would hail him as a crusader for justice. Fox would paint him as an overreaching bureaucrat throwing good men under the bus. "Damage control?" Marcus asked. "That's the thing," the deputy AG said. "The White House is getting calls. Security union leaders are furious. There's talk of a congressional inquiry into your conduct." Marcus snorted. "For firing two racists who assaulted my wife. That's not how they're framing it." He could hear the unspoken part. The system doesn't like it when you call out its rot. By the time he arrived at FBI headquarters, the media trucks were already lined up outside, satellite dishes pointed at the sky, reporters clutching coffee and microphones. His motorcade pulled up to the underground entrance, but even down there, a small knot of journalists had managed to infiltrate, shouting questions as he stepped out. "Director Monroe, is it true you violated agency policy by personally intervening in a security matter?" "Director, are you using your position to settle personal grievances?" He didn't break stride. Inside, the air felt different, charged, tense, every hallway conversation dying the moment he walked past. He could see it in their eyes, some filled with respect, others with resentment. And in the far corner of the lobby, a man in a gray suit he didn't recognize was watching him too intently. By noon, the internal backlash had begun. Anonymous emails circulated, accusing him of weakening security standards and prioritizing personal relationships over national safety. A few were crude, laced with racial undertones so thinly veiled they might as well have been shouted. He called a meeting with the Bureau's executive team. The room was silent as he entered, every face carefully neutral. "We're not here to debate whether the actions taken against my wife were wrong," Marcus began. "They were. We're here to address a deeper problem, one that's been festering in this agency for years. Racial profiling, selective enforcement, the quiet, casual bigotry that undermines the very principles we claim to uphold." A senior counterterrorism chief cleared his throat. "Sir, with all due respect, some officers feel blindsided. The men you fired had good service records." "Good service records don't excuse bad judgment," Marcus said flatly. Another executive shifted uncomfortably. "But the optics." Marcus's hand slammed against the table. The sound cracked through the room. "I'm done with optics. We're in the business of justice, not theater. If you can't tell the difference between a threat and a citizen based on something other than skin color, you have no place here. And if that makes anyone uncomfortable, they can hand in their badge today." Silence. Then, from the far end of the table, a woman from Civil Rights Compliance spoke up. "Director, I agree with you. And I have years of data that show these incidents are more common than anyone wants to admit. If you're serious about this, we can build a task force. Real oversight. Marcus met her eyes. Do it. Effective immediately. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that outside that room, forces were already moving against him. 3 days later, Julia was on her way to her gallery downtown when she noticed the black SUV in her rearview mirror. At first, she told herself it was nothing. This was DC. Black SUVs were as common as Starbucks. But every turn she made, it was still there. She pulled over to the curb, pretending to check her phone. The SUV slowed, idled for a moment, then drove past. Her heart didn't slow down until it was out of sight. That evening, she told Marcus. "They're trying to rattle us," he said, jaw tightening. "They want you scared." "It's working," she admitted. He reached for her hand. "Then they've already won." She looked at him, searching his face. "Marcus, this isn't just about those guards anymore, is it?" "No," he said quietly. "It never was." The first real blow came the next week. A classified case Marcus had overseen, a counterintelligence operation months in the making, suddenly leaked to the press. Details twisted to make it look like he'd mishandled the investigation. Political allies started distancing themselves. Behind closed doors, there was talk of loss of confidence in leadership. He recognized the pattern. He'd seen it happen to other reformers: slow leaks, manufactured scandals, whispers of incompetence. It was the system's immune response to someone trying to change it. One night, after another 12-hour day of firefighting, he came home to find Julia in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables with a kind of fierce precision. "They're coming for you," she said without looking up. "I know. And you're not going to stop." "No." She set down the knife and met his eyes. "Then we fight together." The fight escalated. Marcus's new task force began reviewing thousands of incident reports, pulling up cases of questionable stops and arrests. Each one was a small bomb, evidence that racial bias wasn't an exception but a pattern. Some agents cooperated. Others refused, claiming the review was a witch hunt. The union filed a formal grievance. Anonymous threats started arriving in Marcus's inbox. One night, Julia's gallery was vandalized, spray-painted slurs across the front windows. The police called it random, but Marcus knew better. Standing in the wreckage, Julia refused to cry. "If this is the price," she said, "it's still worth paying." Then came the hearing. Congressional committees love nothing more than a high-profile target, and Marcus was perfect, powerful, outspoken, now accused of overstepping authority. The hearing was televised, every seat in the chamber filled, cameras clicking like gunfire. The first questions were polite, procedural. Then came the attack. "Director Monroe, do you believe it's appropriate for a public official to use his position to settle personal scores?" "This wasn't personal," Marcus said. "It was about principle." "But the incident involved your wife." "Yes. And if it had been a stranger, if it had been your wife, I would have acted the same." The room shifted. A few committee members avoided his gaze. One congressman leaned forward. "Are you suggesting systemic racism exists within the FBI?" "I'm not suggesting it," Marcus said. "I'm proving it." Gasps rippled through the chamber. By the time the hearing ended, the nation was divided. Social media lit up "Stand with Monroe" trending alongside "Fire Monroe." Civil rights groups rallied to his defense. Others called for his resignation. At home that night, Julia sat beside him on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "You know," she said, "you could walk away. Take an early retirement. Start over somewhere quiet." He looked at her, a faint smile on his lips. "And leave the foxes to guard the hen house." Her smile matched his. "I didn't think so." But the real storm was still coming. 2 nights after the hearing, Marcus found the note. It was slipped under his office door, typed on plain white paper, and signed. "Back off, or next time it won't be just paint on her gallery." He read it twice before setting it down, his jaw clenching. Julia's face flashed in his mind, the way she had stood in front of those spray-painted windows, refusing to flinch. Now the threat was no longer implied. It was direct. He called her immediately. "Don't go anywhere alone," he said. She didn't ask why. She could hear it in his voice. The next morning, the Bureau's internal security flagged an unusual access log. Someone had pulled surveillance footage from the day of Julia's arrest. Not the official copies, those were in Marcus's possession, but the raw feeds, unedited. When Marcus demanded to know who authorized it, the system returned a name he recognized: Special Agent Derek Harlow. Harlow had been in the Bureau for over a decade, And his reputation was complicated. Skilled, yes. Loyal, no. He'd skirted disciplinary actions more than once, always surviving on the strength of his connections inside the Bureau's old guard. Marcus summoned him. Harlow walked into the office with the casual swagger of a man who didn't believe in consequences. You wanted to see me, Director? Why did you pull that footage? Marcus asked without preamble. Routine review. Don't lie to me. Harlow smirked. Maybe I thought the committee would want a complete picture. Maybe I don't like how you've been running this place. Marcus leaned forward. You're skating on the edge of insubordination, Agent. Or maybe I'm just tired of the political theater, Harlow said. You think you're saving the Bureau. You're tearing it apart. Marcus's eyes hardened. The Bureau was already broken. I'm just not pretending otherwise. Harlow left without another word, but Marcus knew this wasn't over. That night, Julia woke to the sound of glass shattering. Marcus was out of bed in seconds, grabbing the firearm from the bedside table. They moved quietly toward the living room, his hand out, signaling her to stay back. A brick lay on the hardwood floor, glass scattered like diamonds around it. Attached was a note, written in thick black marker. Last warning. Julia's hand trembled as she picked it up. Marcus. He took it from her and scanned the street outside. No movement. No sound but the distant hum of the city. Whoever had thrown it was already gone. He called it in, but deep down, he knew the local police would file it as vandalism and move on. 2 days later, his task force uncovered something explosive. Dozens of security incident reports, all tied to the same handful of officers, each involving people of color detained without probable cause. And in several cases, those people had been quietly released without charges, meaning the Bureau knew the stops were unjustified, but had never disciplined the officers involved. Marcus stared at the evidence on his desk. This wasn't just a handful of bad actors. This was a network. And the deeper they dug, the more one name kept coming up, Deputy Director Alan Griggs. Griggs had been with the Bureau for 30 years, a man whose handshakes opened doors and whose favors ran deep. He was beloved by the old guard and seen by many as untouchable. Until now. Marcus knew confronting Griggs directly would be dangerous, so he chose his moment carefully. It was late, most of the building empty, when he walked into Griggs's office. Griggs looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. Marcus, to what do I owe the pleasure? I know, Marcus said. Griggs leaned back in his chair. Know what? About the reports. The pattern. The way they all lead back to you. A slow smile spread across Griggs's face. You think you're the first Boy Scout to come in here, waving a stack of paper like it's a sword? I've been running this place since before you learned how to tie a tie. Marcus's voice was cold. You've been running it into the ground. You don't understand how this works, Griggs said. The Bureau survives because we keep order. And sometimes keeping order means keeping people like your wife out of places they don't belong. The room went still. Marcus stepped closer. Say that again. Griggs didn't. He didn't have to. The smugness in his eyes said it all. You're done, Marcus said. Griggs laughed. You don't have the power to touch me. Marcus's smile was thin. Watch me. The next morning, Marcus authorized an internal investigation into Griggs's conduct. It was a declaration of war. Almost immediately, the pushback intensified. The Washington Times ran an exclusive claiming Marcus had used Bureau resources to spy on political opponents. Anonymous sources, no doubt orchestrated by Griggs, fed the narrative. Even some of Marcus's allies began to waver. Maybe you should slow down, the deputy AG advised over the phone. You're poking too many bears at once. They've been hibernating too long, Marcus said. Meanwhile, Julia refused to retreat into safety. She began speaking publicly about her experience in talk shows, at community forums, even in interviews where the hosts tried to bait her into outrage. She stayed calm, composed, but unyielding. They thought they could silence me with fear, she told one audience. But fear only works when you let it. Her visibility made her a target, but it also made it harder for their enemies to strike without the world noticing. Then came the turning point. An anonymous whistleblower contacted Marcus's task force, offering evidence that Griggs had not only covered up incidents of racial profiling, but had actively ordered them in certain high-security areas, justifying it as preventative security. The whistleblower's files included audio recordings, Griggs's own voice instructing officers to keep an eye on anyone who doesn't look like they belong. It was the smoking gun. But it came with a catch. The whistleblower would only hand it over in person at a neutral location. Against his better judgment, Marcus agreed. The meeting was set for midnight, in a parking garage 3 blocks from the Capitol. Marcus went alone, wearing a wire, his service weapon holstered under his jacket. The garage was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Footsteps echoed from the far corner. A man in a hooded sweatshirt emerged, carrying a flash drive. "You're Monroe?" "That's me," Marcus said. The man handed him the drive. "Everything you need is on there. But you didn't get it from me." Before Marcus could respond, a car engine roared to life nearby. Headlights flared. 2 figures stepped out, masks covering their faces. One of them raised a weapon. Marcus dove behind a concrete pillar as gunfire exploded through the garage. The whistleblower screamed, the sound cut short by another shot. Marcus returned fire, his training kicking in. One assailant went down, the other fled into the shadows. When the sirens arrived, the whistleblower was dead, the flash drive clutched in his hand. Marcus knew, as he stared at the body, that this was no random ambush. This was a message. Back at headquarters, forensic techs confirmed the drive was intact. The audio files were clear, damning. And yet, as Marcus sat in his office, he knew the hardest part was still ahead, because the moment he made this public, Griggs and his allies would unleash everything they had left. Julia appeared in the doorway, her presence softening the edges of his resolve. "You have it." He nodded. "Then there's only one thing left to do," she said. Marcus looked at her, feeling the weight of it all, the threats, the sabotage, the blood in that parking garage. "And once I do it, there's no going back." Julia stepped closer, her eyes steady. There never was. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. Marcus arrived at the Hoover building early, the flash drive in his pocket feeling heavier than a brick. Outside, the plaza was already swarming, reporters jockeying for position, camera crews setting up, protesters holding signs both for and against him. Inside, the air was electric. Staff whispered in hallways. Agents glanced up from their desks with unreadable expressions. Some were rooting for him. Others were waiting for him to fall. By the time he stepped up to the podium, the room was silent except for the hum of the cameras. Julia stood just behind him, her presence a steady anchor. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of what was coming. "For months, I've been accused of overstepping my authority, of letting personal matters dictate professional actions. Today, I'm going to show you why those accusations are nothing more than distractions from the real problem." He slid the flash drive into the laptop connected to the room's audio system. A click, a pause, then Griggs's voice filled the room. "Keep an eye on anyone who doesn't look like they belong. Don't give me excuses. We can't afford to be soft. If you have to bend the rules, do it. Better to stop the wrong person than let the wrong one in." The recording played on, each sentence more damning than the last. The reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zooming in on Marcus's face, on Julia's steady gaze, on the shifting, pale expressions of the bureau officials in the front row. When it ended, Marcus spoke again. "This isn't about politics. This isn't about me. This is about a culture inside our law enforcement institutions that allows prejudice to masquerade as protection. And it ends now." The questions came hard and fast. "Director Monroe, are you calling for Deputy Director Griggs's resignation?" "No," Marcus said. "I'm calling for his arrest." The room erupted. Within an hour, Griggs was placed on administrative leave, escorted out of the building by Internal Affairs. But Marcus knew that wouldn't be the end of it. Men like Griggs didn't go quietly, they dug in, they fought dirty, and they had friends in dark places. Sure enough, the counterattack began almost immediately. Old, distorted clips of Marcus's past cases leaked to the press. Anonymous sources accused him of misconduct. A fringe blog claimed Julia had staged her arrest to advance her husband's political ambitions. The smear campaign was relentless, but so was the wave of public support. Civil rights leaders, community groups, and even some unexpected allies inside Congress spoke out in his defense. Social media flooded with messages of solidarity. Still, the threats grew more personal. One night, as Marcus and Julia were leaving an event, a black sedan pulled up beside them. The passenger window rolled down, and a voice hissed, "Walk away, or she's next." Then the car was gone. Marcus filed the report, But he didn't need anyone to tell him this was the final warning before things turned deadly. The breaking point came 3 nights later. Julia was locking up her gallery when the power went out. The streetlights flickered and died, leaving the block in darkness. She reached for her phone, but before she could call Marcus, she heard footsteps behind her. 2 figures emerged from the shadows. One grabbed her arm. She struggled, kicking, screaming, but a hand clamped over her mouth. And then headlights. Tires screeching. Marcus's SUV barreled into the curb, his door flying open before the engine even stopped. He was out in a flash, his service weapon drawn. Let her go. The attackers hesitated just long enough for Julia to twist free. Marcus moved forward, his voice like steel. On the ground now. One man bolted. The other lunged at Marcus. The struggle was brief, but brutal. Marcus's training overpowering the man in seconds. Sirens wailed in the distance. When it was over, Julia clung to him, her breath shaking. They were going to. I know, Marcus said, holding her close. Not while I'm breathing. The arrest of the surviving attacker led to a break in the case. Under pressure, he confessed. The ambush had been ordered by a network of current and former Bureau officials loyal to Griggs. Their goal had been simple: silence Marcus by making him fear for his wife's life. Instead, it became the final nail in their coffin. The next week was a whirlwind. Federal prosecutors moved quickly, filing charges against Griggs and several of his allies for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. The evidence from the whistleblower's flash drive was airtight. Marcus testified before Congress one final time. This time, there were no smirks, no dismissive questions, only a chamber full of lawmakers forced to reckon with what they had allowed to fester. Julia sat in the front row, her presence a silent reminder of what this fight had cost. When it was over, Marcus stepped outside into the sunlight, the crowd of reporters shouting his name. He stopped, raised his hand for silence, and spoke into the sea of microphones. This isn't victory, he said. It's a start. Racism doesn't vanish because you remove one man from power. It hides, it waits, and it will return if we let it. So we stay vigilant. We hold each other accountable. And we never, ever let fear dictate justice. That night, for the first time in months, Marcus and Julia sat together without the weight of imminent threat hanging over them. They ate dinner in their quiet kitchen, the windows open to the sound of the city. You know, Julia said, you could step down now. Go out on a high note. Let someone else carry it forward. Marcus smiled faintly. Maybe, but for now, I think the fight still needs me. She reached across the table, taking his hand. Then I'm with you. Always. They didn't need to say more. Outside, the world was still imperfect, still dangerous. But inside, they had each other, and that was enough to keep going. Weeks later, Marcus stood in the same lobby where Julia had been humiliated months earlier. The marble floors still gleamed, the security desks still stood at attention, but something was different. A new plaque had been installed near the entrance. Justice is blind to color, creed, and origin. So must be those who serve it. Below the words was the seal of the FBI, and beneath that, a smaller inscription. In honor of those who stand against prejudice, even when it stands in their way. Marcus ran his hand over the metal, feeling the cool weight of it. Looks good, doesn't it? A voice said behind him. He turned to see the woman from Civil Rights Compliance, the one who had first offered to build the task force. It's a start, Marcus said again. She smiled. Sometimes that's all you need. Later, as he walked out into the sunlight, Julia waiting for him on the steps, Marcus realized something. The fight was never really over. But neither was the possibility of change. And as long as he had breath in his lungs, he would keep pushing for it, because the alternative was a world where the next Julia Monroe wouldn't walk into this building with her head held high. And that was a world he refused to accept. They descended the steps together, hand in hand, into the noise and chaos of a city still learning how to live up to its own ideals. And somewhere, deep inside, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.